Star Trek is one of my favourite things ever. I've been watching Star Trek since as long as I can remember, and I possess an unhealthy amount of useless technobabble knowledge thanks to compulsively reading the Star Trek fact files. And while the title of this video may seem quite incendiary, there is no denying Star Trek has had success on the big screen. To say all of the Star Trek movies don't work in general would be ridiculous. Some of the greatest and most iconic moments of the franchise come from Kirk and Co.'s big screen outings. Yet, why are the Star Trek movies so divisive? Why are they so hit and miss at the box office, with critics and with fans? Some of these movies gross hundreds of millions of dollars, others fall flat on their faces. Some of them create scenes which have etched themselves permanently into fans' hearts, whereas others are punchlines for years to come. Do the Star Trek movies as a whole suck? The first big screen outing for the franchise was of course Star Trek the Motion Picture. Following the gargantuan hit Star Wars, many big studios scrambled to find their own big screen sci-fi property to get butts in seats, and Paramount had Star Trek, which by this point had gained popularity thanks to a well-received animated show and reruns which pulled in high ratings. However, the motion picture wasn't quite the smash hit Paramount was looking for. While it certainly did well at the box office, critical and fan reception was extremely mixed. The following movie, The Wrath of Khan, was made much cheaper for this very reason, and while it grossed lower than the motion picture, it was a hit with audiences and critics, and so were the next two, Search for Spock and The Voyage Home, completing what has tentatively been called the Star Trek movie trilogy. After this though, the movies took a hit, with The Final Frontier disappointing on all fronts, until finally in 1995, Kirk and Co. were given one last adventure in the undiscovered country, which was a welcome return to form and gave the original cast a nice send-off. The next big screen outing for the franchise came in the form of Star Trek Generations, a film primarily following the Next Generation crew and featured a crossover between the two iconic captains, Kirk and Picard. While I personally like it and it enjoyed a box office success, once again fans and critics were heavily divided. The following films, First Contact and Insurrection, continued the box office success, but only First Contact is the well-regarded film. And for the second time, the Star Trek movies crashed again, with Nemesis releasing to mixed reviews, poor fan reception, and flopping hard at the box office. It took until J.J. Abrams rebooted the whole franchise in 2009 with the definitively titled Star Trek. This seemed to get it right. It was the highest grossing Star Trek movie to date, won over critics by the truckload, and despite some very vocal fan backlash, was overall well enjoyed by fans. The sequel, Into Darkness, looked to be the victory lap for Star Trek's comeback. It was an anticipated sequel with a hot new star attached, but unfortunately, it wasn't the Dark Knight to Star Trek's Batman Begins. While it remains the highest grossing Star Trek movie to date, critical reception was more polarizing, if overall positive, and the fan backlash was even stronger this time. This culminated in the third of the Kelvin timeline films, Star Trek Beyond. While it was received much more positively by fans and critics, a crowded release date and poor marketing campaign saw Star Trek Beyond whimper at the box office and once again shelve plans for Star Trek on the big screen. So what's the reason for this bizarrely haphazard track record? The way I see it, it's quite simple. No one ever answered this simple question. What exactly should a Star Trek movie even be? Over the course of Star Trek's original series, the show ran the gamut of high-concept sci-fi, Federation courtroom drama, interstellar espionage, monster of the week, high-tension space battles, and even Flash Gordon-esque adventure antics. So how exactly does one translate all of this to the big screen? With something like Star Wars, the formula was already nailed on the big screen from the get-go. Audiences have expectations when it comes to seeing a Star Wars movie. There will be good guys and bad guys, some space action, and most likely a lightsaber fight of some kind. But with Star Trek, what should an audience expect? This is a consistent problem with maintaining a successful slate of Star Trek movies. With new creative teams, new casts, and changing audience expectations, nothing is really guaranteed when going into a Star Trek movie. It may be an action-adventure romp with time travel malarkey and monster chases, or it may be a slow, ponderous movie with very little action, mostly contained to one ship. And because of this, many casual moviegoers have waxed and waned on Star Trek, as it has never really been a safe bet at the box office. The pop culture curiosity of Star Trek making it to the silver screen was enough to make the motion picture a hit, but it was Harve Bennett and Nicholas Meyer who seemed to tap into a reliable tone and style for the Star Trek trilogy. That is until William Shatner wanted to go climb some mountains.
Captain Kirk is climbing a mountain. Why is he climbing a mountain?
This was a problem which permeated Star Trek movies all throughout the TNG era as well. Generations is a race to an extra-dimensional ribbon that threatens a single solar system, whereas First Contact is a darker and more action-heavy time travel flick, only for Nemesis to go for a stop evil Tom Hardy from blowing up Earth plot. Sometimes there's some outlandish sci-fi thing which drives the plot, other times events are more akin to a political thriller like in The Undiscovered Country. All the while, the Star Trek movies were missing what I see as a vital component to their success.
Space, the final frontier. To explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Even if wider audiences aren't super familiar with the characters or the universe, the average Joe will recognize these words. And yet in the vast majority of the movies, the Enterprise crew do not go exploring strange new worlds or encountering any new life. The TOS movies mostly show Kirk and his crew past their prime, yearning to get back into space to relive the glory days which have largely passed. The same is unfortunately true of the TNG movies as well, with a line in Insurrection from Picard even lamenting this. This is what ultimately also hurt the Kelvin timeline movies. The first entry into the rebooted movie franchise was an origin story, and while it didn't explore a whole lot of new worlds, it certainly explored new territory character-wise, and Leonard Nimoy's closing narration of those familiar words promised viewers we'd finally get to see the Enterprise crew in their prime, doing what they do best, only for Into Darkness to disappoint by reintroducing Khan and unwisely attempting to recreate exact scenes from The Wrath of Khan itself. The movie landscape at the time was also changing rapidly thanks to the success of the MCU. Initially, the Hollywood blockbuster was being driven by big-name directors driving big brand movie trilogies. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, so why not J.J. Abrams' Star Trek? But when the Avengers crossed $1 billion and proved the interconnected universe of comic book movies could be a success, Star Trek once again seemed like old news. Thus, when Star Trek Beyond finally did fulfill the promise of the Enterprise actually exploring strange new worlds and truly feeling like a big screen version of the original series, it was sandwiched between the cinematic universe attempts of a dozen other studios. Why Paramount decided on a crowded July rather than a clearer September for release is also kind of confusing to me as well. But with the television and movie rights of Star Trek finally reuniting, we can fully expect the franchise to grace cinema screens once again. But how do we stop history from repeating itself? What could be done to make sure these next Star Trek movies are the ones to hit big and stay big? The answers may seem counterintuitive to some, but I believe I have some ideas of my own, so if you'll bear with me, here's what I think should be done. Number 1. No adapting from a TV show. The Star Trek movies should be a brand new cast of characters, not following on from any of the Star Trek TV shows. One of the obstacles that keeps casual audiences away from potentially getting into Star Trek is the perceived density of the franchise's history and lore. With a brand new cast and perhaps a brand new time period too, the feeling you'd need to watch several seasons of TV first to understand the movie wouldn't be there as much. Meeting a new ensemble on new adventures could hook new viewers into becoming die-hard Trekkies down the line. Number 2. Make it an action and adventure movie. Now I know Star Trek has done slower, less action-heavy stories, etc, etc, but for something that's worth an IMAX ticket, we should get to see some spectacle and have some excitement. Now this doesn't mean endless space battles and phaser fights, but a healthy balance could be struck of Mission Impossible or Indiana Jones style set pieces which could become iconic in their own right. And before anyone says you can't have intelligent social commentary or rich themes alongside big screen action, go have a word with Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve. Number 3. Have a formula. Now this may sound like close-minded business-driven corporate speak, but Star Trek on the big screen needs to be defined. Let the TV shows mix and match genres. For audiences to fork out cash to go to the cinemas, they need assurances. So nail down what exactly a Star Trek movie will deliver. And lest anyone think having a formula for these movies would make them boring after a while, just remember, James Bond is on its 26th installment. Those are my ideas anyway. If you agree, disagree, or have ideas of your own, comment them down below. Chris McWaters asks, what do you think of the Homeworld games? I love the Homeworld games. I think the way they truly use 3D space in space combat is excellent and can be a real challenge in managing tactics. I also really love the world of those games. I'd be very surprised if Ronald D. Moore didn't take inspiration from them when developing his version of Battlestar Galactica. The stories in the world is a great blend of grand mythology but also grounded and gritty. I think the setting, story, and some of the characters could make a brilliant TV series if someone ever wanted to adapt it. But either way, I'm excited for the next installment too. Pudlord Tynan asks, what are your thoughts on Power Rangers? I used to watch the original Power Rangers show as a kid and had a lot of fun Power Rangers toys, but I can't say I've really kept up with it. I know it has a huge adult following, but I can't say I'm really all that interested in the universe or the subsequent shows. Certainly seems like fun though. Thanks for watching. If you like my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all my new uploads. Over on my Patreon, you can see videos early. Speaking of such, I want to give special thanks to all of my patrons now appearing on screen. Until next time, have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.